Okay, here we go, Masechta Dmai, Parak Zayin Mishnah Aleph. This is the last parak of Masechta Dmai. Hamazman es chaver she'echel etzleiv. Someone invites his friend before Shabbos to eat with him on Shabbos. So we learned previously that it's also to separate Meiser and Shabbos even from Dmai. We discussed this in the first parak. So Mishnah will now explain how someone who's unable to separate Meiser from Dmai before Shabbos because he doesn't have it yet can still eat it on Shabbos by designating the Meiser in advance to take effect on Shabbos. In the case the Mishnah will discuss, nothing actually becomes Meiser or Trumas Meiser on Erev Shabbos. The person designates now the food he will put aside tomorrow for this purpose when he gets the Dmai. Since he makes the designations before Shabbos, it's mutter. Although a person cannot normally take off Meiser from food that is not yet his, the Chachamim were makel in this case in order to allow people to be able to eat the Dmai that will be served on Shabbos. The procedure that will be described here is similar to the one we learned previously in Parag Hamish and a base for separating Truma and Meiser from produce without having to remove any other Meiser from it. However, since we speak here about Dmai, it's not necessary to separate Truma from it. Even Amei Ha'aretz, we're careful to separate Truma. The only Meiser that will actually have to be removed will be Truma's Meiser. So Mazman es chaver she'echel etzleiv. Someone invites his friend before Shabbos to eat with him on Shabbos, ve'einu ma'amini ala Meisers, and the guest doesn't trust the host regarding Meiser, but he doesn't want to insult him by refusing to eat with him, he may do the following. Aymer me'erev Shabbos, the guest should say on Erev Shabbos, ma'ashani osed lahafresh machar, part of the food which I'll separate tomorrow, meaning 100th of the food that I'm going to separate tomorrow from the food that I'm served on Shabbos by, the Suda, Harehu Meiser, is designated as Meiser Rishon for the food. The guest will separate from the food he has served on Shabbos only 100th of it, the amount corresponding to Trumas Meiser. The other Meisers will not have to be separated. He will simply assign them a place on the food, and once the designations take effect, based on the declaration before Shabbos, he will then be able to eat them. This is because the Meiser of Dmai does not have to be given away besides the Trumas Meiser. The guest then estimates how much he will eat tomorrow and designates in advance 100th of that amount as the first part of the Meiser Rishon. Ushar Meiser Samachloi, and the rest of the Meiser Rishon, which would be 9 out of 100 of the food, is designated next to it. Since Trumas Meiser can be taken only from Meiser Rishon, he must designate a full amount of Meiser Rishon in order for the Trumas Meiser to take effect. A total of 1/10, meaning 10 out of 100 of the food he will be served tomorrow, has now been designated in advance as Meiser Rishon. Sezesha Asisi Meiser also Trumas Meiser Alav. He then says that 1 out of 100 which I first made part of the Meiser Rishon is going to be made into Trumas Meiser for the Meiser Rishon. The 1 out of 100 of the food that he first designated as the first part of his Meiser Rishon, he now designates as Trumas Meiser for the other 9 of the food that he also designated as Meiser Rishon. Meiser Sheni b'tzvaynoi or b'draymai. And finally, the last thing he says is that the Meiser Sheni for the food is designated on the north side of the food or on the other side of the food, al hamois, and is going to be redeemed onto the coins that are set aside for this purpose. By making this declaration before Shabbos, all the necessary Meisers have been designated in advance for the Dmai the guest will be served on Shabbos. On Shabbos, the guest takes 100th of the portion, sets it aside of Trumas Meiser, then Dmai, then eats the remainder of the food without any concern. Now, obviously, the Meiser Sheni, he needs to take it up to Yerushalayim and spend it on food and be eaten there. And on the basis of the declaration made before Shabbos, the designation of Meisers takes effect on Shabbos. When he separates from his food, the portion he's eating for Trumas Meiser becomes Trumas Meiser. The Chachamim were matter this in our case because the guest is not actually designating the Meiser on Shabbos, but simply identifying the portion on which the earlier declaration takes effect. In Parak Daled Mishnah Beis, we also dealt with someone who was invited to eat on Shabbos in the home of someone whose food is Dmai, and it didn't require the person to designate Meisers in advance. There, the Mishnah spoke of a person who was invited to a feast in honor of a newly married couple on the first Shabbos after the wedding. Since turning down such an invitation would lead to animosity, the Chachamim were makel and allowed the person to eat at the Suda of the Sheva Brachos without taking off Meiser from the Dmai, as long as the host says that Meiser was taken off. Our Mishnah, however, speaks of an invitation to a regular Shabbos meal, so the Chachamim were not makel to eat Dmai in such a case. Mishnah Beis. Mos Gula is HaKois, Oimer Mashani Osid L'Shari B'Shvuli HaKois, Hareyu Meiser. The previous Mishnah taught that a person is allowed to eat an Am Ha'aretz's food on Shabbos by making a declaration before Shabbos designating the Dmai Meiser. The Mishnah adds another detail to this halacha. The declaration he made before Shabbos must be repeated on Shabbos just before he eats the food. Although the Mishnah speaks of drinks, the same halacha applies to the solid foods mentioned in the previous Mishnah. So Mazgulay Sakos, when they pour the guest a cup of wine on Shabbos, Omer, he says the same declaration that he said before Shabbos. The declaration the Mishnah will use is essentially the same as the one of the previous Mishnah. However, the wording is different because our Mishnah speaks of drink rather than a solid food. In the case of solid food, he would repeat the words he said in the previous Mishnah. This Mishnah speaks of wine to teach that the declaration for drinks is different from the declaration of solid foods. The guest should not say this declaration out loud, but should whisper it so as not to insult the host. Because the whole point over here is not to insult him. So if he's gonna make a loud announcement, okay, I'm doing this not to insult you, that's not going to help anything. Omer, he says, Mashani osid l'shayir b'shuli hakois, that which I leave at the bottom of the cup of wine, which would be 1/100th of the wine, harei meiser, is designated as part of the meiser rishon for the wine I'm about to drink. Ushar meiser samach loy, and the rest of the meiser rishon, 9 out of 100, is designated next to it on the bottom of the cup. The declaration mentioned in the previous Mishnah that 1 out of 100 which I'll separate from the food I am served is useful only for foods. In that case, it's possible to separate a small portion of food on Shabbos before eating it without the host noticing. However, in the case of liquids, it's usually impossible for the guest to pour out part of his drink without the host noticing. Therefore, a different declaration is necessary. Since it's normal for a guest to leave a small amount of drink at the bottom of his cup, the host will not realize that the guest suspects him of not taking off meiser properly. Harehu meiser, ushar meiser samach loy, v'zeh shasisi meiser also trumas meiser alav. He then says that 1 out of 100 which I first made meiser rishon is merited to trumas meiser for the meiser rishon. And the meiser sheni for the wine is designated at the top of the cup, meaning at the opening of the cup and not bepiv in his mouth. And is going to be redeemed onto coins that are set aside for this purpose. Having made this declaration before and on Shabbos, the guest may drink what he is served, as long as he leaves 1/100th of the wine at the bottom of the cup as trumas meiser dmai. The wine that's left on the bottom then becomes a trumas meiser retroactively to the time before he drank the wine. So it was permissible for him to drink it. Although this involves breira, we have already learned that breira may be relied on in certain cases of Dmai. Repeating the declaration on Shabbos is not considered the same as taking off Meiser on Shabbos because the main act of Meiser was done before Shabbos. Nevertheless, since the Dmai was not yet available to him before Shabbos, it's proper that he identify the Meiser on Shabbos before eating the food. Mishnah Gimel. Hoyel she'enei ma'amel l'bal habayis, a worker who was given the right to eat from the dried figs he's working on but doesn't trust the employer to have separated Meiser from them. The Mishnah speaks of a case where the employer agreed to provide his workers with food as part of their wage, or in place where it was the common practice to do so. The worker is thus entitled to eat from the figs he's working on. However, he doesn't trust the employer to have taken meiser off the figs. So Nedel Gregor's Achas V'Omer, he takes one dried fig and he says, Zuvatesha boy Sacharel, this dried fig and the 9 that come after it, meaning the next 9 that I'll take, Asuyas Meiser Al Tishim Shani Oichel, are going to be made into meiser rishon for the other 90 figs that I'll eventually eat. That is, for the other 90 figs that I'll now be able to take and eat because they are now chulin. The Mishnah illustrates the procedure with an example of a worker who's allowed to eat 100 figs. This number makes it simpler to calculate the meiser. So 10 figs need to be designated as meiser rishon, from which one will be separated as trumas meiser and given to a kohen. Zu asuyu trumas meiser alehen, and this dried fig that I'm holding is going to be made into trumas meiser for the other 9 figs of meiser rishon. Meiser sheni b'achreina, he continues, and the meiser sheni for the figs is designated in the next 9 figs. That is, the figs from 11 through 19 are going to be designated as meiser sheni, and are going to be redeemed onto the coins that are set aside for this purpose. And then he may begin eating the figs. He may even eat the figs he designated as meiser rishon and meiser sheni, because meiser rishon and dmai does not have to be given away. Meiser sheni has already been redeemed, but he must refrain from eating one dried fig, the one that he designated as trumas meiser, which must be given to a kohen. So he's only allowed to eat 99 out of 100 figs. He may not take an additional fig from the owner to replace the fig he separated as trumas meiser, because his employer agreed to give him 100 figs, not 101. To take another fig would be stealing. Although the employer agreed to provide the worker with 100 figs that he can eat, he claims that his produce is meiser already. Just because the worker doesn't believe him is not a reason to obligate the owner to give him another fig. Reb Shimon Gamliel says, Lo yachsech the worker should not refrain from eating the full 100 figs, because if he eats less than the amount he's used to eating, he reduces the quality of his work for the employer, because he'll not have as much strength for his work as he should. Rather, he must buy an additional fig from the employer as a replacement for the one he designated trumas meiser, so he can eat 100 figs. Reb Shimon Gamliel agrees with the Tana Kama that the employer is not obligated to give the worker an additional fig to replace the one he separated trumas meiser. However, he argues that the worker is not permitted to eat less than its usual amount because it will negatively affect the quality of his work. And a worker must be careful to eat and rest properly to make sure that he's able to work to the best of his ability. Not to do so is a form of stealing for the employer. Rabbi Yossi Omer lo yachzech mipnei shu t'nai bezdin. Although the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon and Gamliel disagree about how many figs the worker must eat, they both agree that the piece separated as Trumas Meiser is subtracted from the worker's share of the figs, not the employer's. The Mishnah cites a third Tana who disputes this. Rabbi Yossi says that the worker need not refrain from eating 100 of his employer's figs, mipnei shu t'nai bezdin, because it's a condition of bezdin. It's a takonis chachamim that an employer must compensate the worker for the Trumas Meiser that he separates from his share. It's a Tanai Bezdin that the worker is allowed to take another fig from the employer's supply without asking the employer's permission. So according to Rabbi Yossi, the employer will end up giving the worker 101 figs, 100 for the worker's meal, and 1 for Trumas Meiser. However, the Bezdin did not obligate the employer to give extra figs for Meiser Sheni. Since the worker may eat those figs immediately by redeeming them, the Chachamim did not impose the cost of Meiser Sheni on the owner. So according to Rabbi Yossi, it's the employer who must suffer the loss of Trumas Meiser. The worker is thus allowed to take an additional fig from his employer to replace the one that he separated as Trumas Meiser. Mishnah Dalet. Halakei yain miben hakusim. Someone buys wine on Erev Shabbos from the kusim, as we spoke earlier that the kusim are not Shemer Torah mitzvahs, they're Evdei Avodah, and he forgot to take Meiser before Shkia, when it becomes forbidden to separate Meiser from Vadai. So what should he do? So Bein Hashmashas is a halachic uncertainty. It's possibly day and it's possibly night. On Friday night, therefore, this time period is possibly Shabbos. Nevertheless, the Chachamim were matir taking off Meiser from Dmai because of a suffix, because it's not Vadai, but Vadai would be also to take off Meiser. So the Mishnah is going to tell us what can be done to be matir Tevel during this time. It's not only forbidden to separate Meiser from Tevel during this time, it's forbidden to verbally designate specific parts of Tevel to be Meiser. Identifying the parts that are being designated as Meiser is considered the same as separating them. So if someone buys wine on Erev Shabbos from the Kusim and didn't take a Meiser before sunset, Oimer, he says, Shnei Lugan Shani Osir Lahafresh, in the case where he bought 100 Lugan of wine. A loig is a liquid measure equal to the volume of 6 eggs, which is between 16 and 21 ounces. The Mishnah uses a case of a barrel containing 100 Lugan of wine in order to simplify the cheshbon of Meiser over here. So, Shnei Lugan Shani Osir Lahafresh, in the case where he bought 100 Lugan of wine, he said the 2 Lugan of wine that I'll separate after Shabbos, Harei Hein Truma. So unlike in Mishnah Beis, in our case, he does not set aside the wine that will become Truma until after Shabbos. So we'll explain the reason for this later. So, Harei Hein Truma, the designated as Truma as of now. That is, the Truma designation takes effect immediately, but will not know which 2 Lugan are designated are until they're separated sometime after Shabbos. Once they're separated, it will become retroactively clear that those 2 Lugan were the ones that were designated originally. The same is true for the other Meisers that the Mishnah will now mention. So Harei Hein Truma, these are Truma Vasara Meiser. 10 additional Lugan that will separate after Shabbos are going to be designated as Meiser Rishon, V'tisha Meiser Sheni, and 9 additional Lugan that will separate after Shabbos are going to be designated as Meiser Sheni. The Mishnah's numbers are not precise. After 2 Lugan are designated as Truma, only 98 Lugan remain. So the 10% of the remainder that must be designated as Meiser Rishon is actually 9.8 Lugan. Similarly, after 9.8 Lugan are designated as Meiser Rishon, there are only 88.2 Lugan remaining. So the 10% that he must designate as Meiser Sheni comes out of 8.82 Lugan. So for the sake of simplicity, the Mishnah rounds these numbers to the nearest complete number, 10 for Meiser Rishon and 9 for Meiser Sheni. So Meichel V'Shaisa, he may then begin to drink the wine immediately, as long as he's careful to leave over the amounts he designated as Truma and Meisers. This halacha is based on the idea of Breira, which states that a choice is made at a later time can retroactively establish the halachic status of something at an earlier time. By separating after Shabbos the 21 Lugan that will be Truma and Meisers, he retroactively determines that these Lugan were Truma and Meisers from the entire barrel from the time he made his declaration on Friday evening. The rest of the wine was therefore permissible for him to drink on Shabbos, since he didn't identify on Shabbos which Lugan were Gemaiset, so did not actually separate them. The Chachamim were Mekel and allowed the declaration to be made in order to permit him to use the wine on Shabbos. Even this kula was permitted only during Ben Hashmashas, when it's not yet definitely Shabbos. Once nightfall has arrived and it's Vadai Laila, it's definitely Shabbos, saying even this Breira is going to be Aser. In Mishnah Beis we learned that a person taking of Meiser in advance, the Dmai will be given to drink on Shabbos, he may identify on Shabbos as the part that will become Meiser. As he said, what I'm leaving on the bottom of my cup. The Chachamim were matir to do this only for taking of meiser from the plate of food or the cup of drink that it's actually being eaten on Shabbos. We're not matarich for taking of meiser from an entire barrel, much of which will not be used until after Shabbos. Since our Mishnah speaks of tevel, it's clear that the Tan of our Mishnah holds that we apply the halacha of breira even to cases of the oraisa. That's a machlekes Tanoim in Gittin on Daf Chav Hey. The accepted halacha is that we do not rely on breira in matters of the oraisa, but only in cases of midrabanan. Okay, Mishnah Hey. How you like to einim shall tevel b'seich beisay? The Mishnah discusses another case in which a person is unable to separate meiser from tevel before Shabbos. The Mishnah teaches a declaration that he can make, similar to the one of the previous Mishnah, to be matter the tevel for Shabbos. How you like to einim shall tevel b'seich beisay? If someone had 100 figs of tevel inside his house, but on Erev Shabbos he's in the Bismedrash or working in the field, he's concerned that he'll not return home in time to take meiser from the figs before Shabbos begins. So Oimer state to Ein Shani Asad Lahafresh, he says the 2 figs that I'll separate after Shabbos, Harehin Truma, the designated as Truma, Ve'eser Meiser Rishon, and 10 additional figs that I will separate after Shabbos are going to be designated as Meiser Rishon, V'teisha Meiser Sheni, and 9 additional figs that I'll separate after Shabbos are going to be designated as Meiser Sheni. This is the same declaration that was used in the previous Mishnah to designate the Meiser of Tevel wine, except that the text of that declaration was for liquids, while this one is for solid foods. However, the law is the same for drinks and foods. The Mishnah speaks of making the declaration before Shabbos, not during Panish Mashas. V'teisha Meiser Sheni, he may then eat the figs on Shabbos as long as he leaves over enough of them to be separated after Shabbos as Truma and Meisers as he designated. And this will be being Saimech on Breira, as we mentioned previously. Hayu Dmai, if the figs were Dmai and not Tevel, so when taking Meiser of Dmai, there's no need to separate Truma, as we learned previously. Also does not have to separate Meiser Rishon, but merely designate it. So the previous declaration from the previous Mishnah is therefore not going to be appropriate over here. So Oimer, he says, Ma'ashani Osad Lahafresh L'Mochar, the fig that I'll separate after Shabbos, Arehu Meiser, is designated as Meiser Rishon. The word L'Mochar does not belong here and should be deleted as per the Tesis Yontif. So Ushar Meiser Rishon, and the rest is going to be Meiser Rishon. Another 9 figs is designated next to it. Since we're dealing with Demai, for which the owner need not give away the Meiser Rishon, he needs only to designate the Meiser Rishon and then separate 1 fig for Trumas Meiser. He therefore begins by designating as Meiser Rishon the 1 fig he will later separate as Trumas Meiser, and identifies the other 9 figs that become Meiser Rishon along with it. So 10 figs with 10% of the pile have now been designated as Meiser Rishon. Zesha Asisi Meiser, Asri Trumas Meiser Alav. He then says that fig which I made into Meiser Rishon first is going to be made into Trumas Meiser for the other 9 figs of Meiser Rishon. Meiser Sheni B'Tzveni B'Draim. The Meiser Sheni for those 100 figs is designated in the north or the southern side of the pile. And it's going to be redeemed onto the coins that I set aside for this purpose. Having made this declaration, he may eat the figs on Shabbos, leaving over at least 1 fig that will separate after Shabbos as Trumas Meiser. In Mishnah Aleph, we learned that someone wishing to take off Meiser from Demai before Shabbos may say that the piece that he sets aside on Shabbos should become Trumas Meiser. However, as we learned in the previous Mishnah, that Kula was said only for somebody taking off Meiser from Demai that he'll actually eat on Shabbos. In our case, where he's taking off Meiser from his entire pile of figs, much of which will not be eaten until after Shabbos, the Chachamim were not matir identifying on Shabbos the portions that are Meiser. For this reason, he must put off separating the figs that will be Trumas Meiser until after Shabbos. Mishnah Vav. The rest of the parak and the rest of the Masechta is going to be dealing with the designation of Meiser for Tevel. We learned in parak Hey that a person can separate Meiser from 1 batch of Tevel on behalf of another batch, as long as both batches are equally subject to the same Meisers, that they're either both Tevel or both Demai, from the same Amaret. If they are not, so taking of Meiser from one on behalf of the other is not effective. So the Meiser that was designated does not become Meiser, and the produce for which it was Gemeiser remains Tevel. So our Mishnah is going to deal with someone who has 2 baskets of Tevel, and he designates the Meiser for one in the other. It teaches when the designations are effective for both baskets and when they are effective only for one. The Mishnah discusses 3 cases. The simple case is going to be the one that it starts off with first. If someone had in front of him 2 baskets of Tevel, he said the Meiser of this basket should be designated in the second basket. The fruit in the first basket is Meiser. Since the fruit in both baskets is Tevel, designating fruit in the second basket as Truma and Meisers for the fruit of the first basket is going to be effective, and all the fruit in the first basket may now be eaten. Although he did not yet physically separate the Truma and Meiser fruits from the rest of the second basket, his designation is effective immediately, and it's matter him to eat the fruits in the first basket, as we have learned in the previous Mishnah. However, he may not eat the fruit in the second basket, since he did not yet take off meiser from the fruit. Thus, when he wants to eat the fruit in that basket, he must separate two sets of meiser from it, its own meiser plus the meiser from the first basket. Since he did not specify where in the second basket the meisers for the first basket should take effect, the designation can be effective through breira. Then he later separates the necessary number of fruits for the meiser in the other basket. Those fruits are retroactively determined to be the meiser fruits he designated originally, as we learned in Mishnah Dalet. Shel Zubizu, if he said the meiser of the first basket are going to be designated in the second basket, and the meiser of the second basket are going to be designated in the first basket, harishayim usaras, only the fruit of the first basket is going to be gemeiser, but the fruit of the second basket remains tevel. As soon as he said that the first basket's meiser are in the second basket, the fruit in the first basket can become meiser, and it's going to be mutter. Since it's now no longer tevel, the fruit cannot be used as meiser for the second basket, because something that's not mechuyev in meiser cannot be designated as meiser for something that is still mechuyev, and that would be a problem of ein mafrishim min haptor lachiyev u'min hachiyev al haptor. Therefore, the first part of his declaration is effective, and the first basket is meiser, but the second part is not effective, and the second basket remains tevel. This is L'shita's Remeir, who says in Masechta Tmura that when a person makes two declarations together, the second one contradicts the first one, and we follow his first declaration. Tfais Lashon Rishon. In order to fix the fruit in the second basket, he must now separate it from both its own meisers and the first basket's meisers, as in the previous case of the Mishnah. Masriseyem meisers kalkala b'chaverta. And the third case of the Mishnah is, he says that the meiser of the two baskets are going to be designated one in the other, karashem. He has designated the meiser for one basket and the other, and he may separate the meiser for both baskets from whichever basket he chooses. And this statement is understood to mean that the meiser of one basket are designated in whichever basket I will choose. When he chooses one basket for separating meiser, the other one becomes mutter right away. He then must separate both sets of meiser from the basket he chooses to permit its fruit to be eaten. In this case, the count of the brera allows him not only to determine which fruits are in the meisers, but also which baskets they are in. Mishnah Zayin and Ches will be in the next situation. Mishnah Zayin. Mea tevel, mea chulin, noitel mea ve'echad. The Mishnah is going to be discussing three cases which produces either tevel, meiser rishon, or chulin, which means mesukin, became mixed with one of the others in equal amounts. When the mixture contains unequal amounts of the two components, the rules are somewhat different. The last case of the Mishnah will deal with that situation. The Mishnah teaches us how to fix these mixtures in order to permit them to be used. The Chachamim were misak in a number of formulas for dealing with different kinds of mixtures. The basic rule for all of them is to divide the mixture into two equal parts, treat the first half as the stricter of the two components in the mixture, and the second half as the other components. However, since even a second half will in reality contain some of the stricter component, a further adjustment is needed to that half to permit it to be used. These formulas are therefore all in the form of take out half plus a certain amount of extra from the other half. The reason for these formulas work will be explained in each case. The point of them is to ensure that the proper amount of meiser for the entire mixture is separated with the least amount of loss to the owner. However, since the two components can never really be separated from each other, there will necessarily be some loss to the owner in the form of extra meiser. As we'll see below, these extra meiser will all be trumas meiser. So the first case that the Mishnah is going to talk about is if you have mea tevel, mea chulin. If 100 measures of tevel became mixed with 100 measures of chulin, for example, 100 lugan of tevel wine fell into 100 lugan of chulin wine, and the owner wishes to take off meiser from the tevel in the mixture so as to be able to drink the wine. So it's interesting that the Mishnah deals with liquids which can be assumed to mix evenly. He cannot simply separate meisers from it as he would from ordinary tevel, because part of whatever he separates will be chulin, which cannot be used for meisers. The simplest solution would be to take other tevel to use as meisers for the tevel in the mixture. However, the Mishnah speaks of a case where he has no other tevel to use and must therefore take off meiser from the mixture from within itself. So neitel mea ve'echad, he takes out from the mixture 100 lugan and treats it as tevel, and he takes out 100 loig. He takes out one loig from the other 100 in order to permit that 100 as well. Since 100 lugan of tevel fell in, he must take off meiser from 100 lugan. Although the 100 lugan he now removes are half chulin, he can separate all the meisers he needs for the entire mixture from these 100 lugan, except for one. For this he needs to separate an extra loig from the other 100, as we will explain. So the 100 he removed to treat as tevel, he takes off Meiser as he would any tevel. He separates 10 lugan as Meiser Rishon and gives it to a Levi. The Levi must then separate one leg of this Meiser Rishon as Trumas Meiser and give it to a Kohen. The Mishnah is talking about tevel from which Truma has already been separated, so the only remaining Meiser is Meiser Rishon, Trumas Meiser, and Meiser Sheni, and this is going to be true for the rest of the Mishnah as well. He then designates another 9 lugan as Meiser Sheni, which he redeems. After separating the 10 lugan of Meiser Rishon and giving them to a Levi, 90 lugan remain. Although he designated 9 of these 90, which is 10% as Meiser Sheni, he was paid to them so that they too are now mutter. For this reason, he does not actually separate the Meiser Sheni, he designates it verbally and redeems it. Since he does not have to remove the Meiser Sheni from the mixture, he can designate 9 lugan of real tevel as Meiser Sheni, wherever in these 90 lugan they may be, and thereby fulfill the Meiser Sheni obligation for the entire mixture, including the wine in the second half. So a total of 90 lugan in the first half are now going to be mutter to use. He must also do something to fix the other 100 lugan, since these two contain tevel. He verbally designates 10 of them as Meiser Rishon, and then takes out one of them as Trumas Meiser. This extra one loig mentioned above. The rest of the Meiser Rishon he keeps for himself. He does not have to give it to a Levi, because the Levi already received a share of 10 lugan from the first 100 lugan. Since he separated Trumas Meiser from it, anyone may eat it. So he's able to keep the extra Meiser Rishon and use it for himself. There's also no need to designate Meiser Sheni for the 99 lugan, because that too was taken care of when he took off the Meiser from the first 100 lugan. But Kitzer, the owner of this mixture, does not lose anything in regard to Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. He ends up giving to the Levi only the amount of Meiser Rishon he would have given had the tevel not been mixed with chulin, which was 10 lugan. Similarly, he's paid only the amount of Meiser Sheni that he would have redeemed anyway, which is 9 lugan. The only loss he suffers as a result of the mixing is that he has to give away one extra leg of Trumas Meiser from the second 100. In effect, he treats the second 100 as chulin in regard to Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni, but as tevel in regard to Trumas Meiser. A total of 90 lugan in the first half are now permitted to use. He may now drink those 99 lugan as well. As a result of this entire process, he ends up being able to use 189 of the 200 lugan in the mixture. There's one leg less than he would have been able to use had he taken off meiser from the tevel before it became mixed. Had he taken off meiser from the tevel before it became mixed, he would have given 10 lugan to a Levi, which would have left him with 90, not 89. The Meiser Sheni he would have redeemed and used. That plus the 100 lugan of chulin would have become part of the mixture, would have added up to 190 lugan. As a result of the mixture, he ends up being able to use only 189 lugan, which is 90 plus 99. The second case of the Mishnah is where you have an equal mixture of tevel and Meiser Rishon. Mea tevel, mea Meiser. If we have 100 lugan of tevel that became mixed with 100 lugan of Meiser Rishon, from which Trumas Meiser has not yet been taken from, so netel mea ve'echad. In this case too, he takes out 100 lugan and treats them as tevel, and he also takes out one leg from the other 100. As in the previous case, the 100 that he treats as tevel, he takes off Meiser, as he would to any tevel, and he separates from them 10 lugan as Meiser Rishon and gives it to a Levi. The Levi then separates one of these 10 as Trumas Meiser and gives it to a Kohen, and designates another 9 lugan as Meiser Sheni and redeems it, and now 90 lugan are his to keep. However, the other 100 lugan which he treats as Meiser Rishon also contains tevel. He fixes this by separating one leg as Trumas Meiser as he did in the previous case, and this takes care of the tevel concern. And as far as the tevel is concerned, it makes no difference whether it mixes with chulin or Meiser Rishon. So just as one extra leg of Trumas Meiser was enough to take care of the tevel concern in the previous case, so too it's enough in this case. The remaining 99 lugan he treats as Meiser Rishon. He therefore separates from them another 9.9 lugan, which is a tenth of 99, as Trumas Meiser, and he gives the rest to a Levi. As a result of this process, the Kohen ends up with 11.9 lugan of Trumas Meiser, and the owner loses only 9/10 of a leg because of the mixing. The Kohen receives 11.9 lugan as Trumas Meiser, one leg from the first half of the mixture, which is the 100 lugan of tevel, and 10.9, which is 1 plus 9.9 from the second half of the mixture, the 100 lugan of Meiser Rishon. Had the tevel and Meiser Rishon not been mixed together, the Kohen would have received only 11 lugan, 1 from the 100 lugan of tevel and 10 from the 100 lugan of Meiser Rishon. Now that they're mixed together, he receives 0.9 of a leg more. The owner has thus lost 0.9 of a leg. Now, the third case is an equal mixture of chulin and Meiser Rishon. So mea chulin misukanim, mea Meiser. For 100 lugan of misukin, chulin from which all Meiser has already been separated, became mixed with 100 lugan of Meiser Rishon, from which Trumas Meiser has not yet been separated. Neitel mea ve'eser. He takes 100 lugan and treats them as Meiser Rishon, and he also takes out 10 lugan from the other 100. The 100 lugan he treats as Meiser Rishon, he takes off Meiser as he would any Meiser Rishon. He separates from them 10 lugan as Trumas Meiser and gives it to a Kohen. Since we're treating this first 100 as Meiser Rishon, he gives the rest of it to a Levi. However, the 100 lugan he treats as Chulin also contains Meiser Rishon. He must therefore also separate from them 10 lugan for Trumas Meiser. This is because we treat even the Chulin part as Meiser Rishon in regard to Trumas Meiser. However, in regard to other matters, we treat it as Chulin. Thus, he need not give up another 90 lugan to a Levi, but may keep it for himself and use it for himself. As a result of this entire process, 20 lugan become Trumas Meiser and are given to a Kohen, 90 lugan are given to a Levi as Meiser Rishon, and the owner keeps 90 lugan for himself. The owner ends up losing 10 lugan. Had the Meiser Rishon and Chulin not become mixed, the owner would simply have given 100 lugan of Meiser Rishon to a Levi, would have separated 10 lugan as Trumas Meiser and given it to a Kohen, leaving him with 90. The owner would have kept all 100 lugan of Chulin for himself. As a result of becoming mixed, he ended up keeping only 90. Now the fourth case of the Mishnah, Mea Tevel Tisha Meiser. If 100 lugan of Tevel became mixed with 90 lugan of Meiser Rishon, Tishim Tevel Shmaina Meiser. Or if 90 lugan of Tevel became mixed with 80 lugan of Meiser Rishon, Lehifsid Klum. The owner has not lost anything. That is, that he does not have to separate any more Meiser than he would have had to separate had the Tevel and Meiser not become mixed. Since in both cases there are at least 10 more lugan of Tevel and Meiser Rishon, the owner can separate the Trumas Meiser from the extra Tevel and avoid any loss. To illustrate this, in the case where the mixture contains 190 lugan, 100 Tevel and 90 Meiser Rishon, the owner removes 19 lugan. These 19 lugan are actually made up of 10 lugan of Tevel and 9 lugan of Meiser Rishon. He designates the 10 lugan of Tevel as Meiser Rishon. For the other 90 lugan of Tevel in the mixture, says all 19 lugan he removes are now Meiser Rishon. He then separates 10 lugan from these 19 as Trumas Meiser for all the Meiser in the mixture. That is what he would have given as Trumas Meiser even if the Tevel and Meiser Rishon had not been mixed, which would be 9 lugan from the 90 of Meiser Rishon and 1 from the 100 of Tevel, and the owner thus loses nothing. Zehaklal. This is the rule. Kolzman sha Tevel meruba. As long as the Tevel of the mixture is more than the Meiser Rishon by at least 10 lugan, lehifsid klum, the owner has not lost anything. Although the procedure described in the previous note could have been used in the second case as well, the Chachamim were not materit except where the Tevel is more than the Meiser by at least 10 measures. Where it doesn't, where you don't have 10 measures more, they required him to use the procedure described in the second case and bear the loss of the extra Trumas Meiser. Mishnah Ches, the last Mishnah. Misha Hayle Eser Shurais Shel Eser Kadayayin. The Mishnah discusses 5 cases in which someone designated Meiser Rishon for some of his wine barrels, but doesn't remember which barrels he designated it. The Mishnah teaches how to best separate the Meiser Rishon in order to permit most of those barrels. So the first case is Misha Hoyle Eser Shurei Shel Eser Kadayayin. If someone had 10 rows of 10 barrels of wine each, meaning he had 100 barrels of wine standing in a square, 10 barrels wide and 10 barrels long. And he said, in the outer row of these 100 barrels, I designated 1 barrel as Meiser Rishon. For the wine I have somewhere else. However, he never specified which barrel he designated in that row. This he intended to determine later by picking 1 barrel and relying on Brera to identify retroactively. But he doesn't know which outer row it was. He forgot which of the 4 outer rows he had specified. Since there are 4 outer rows, meaning the bottom, the extreme right, the extreme left, and the top, the Meiser Rishon barrel may be in any one of those 4 rows. The Mishnah refers to a case in which the owner has no available Meiser Rishon wine on which to separate Trumas Meiser on behalf of these 100 barrels. He therefore must separate Trumas Meiser from one of the barrels. Of course, the owner can simply take out 4 barrels, 1 from each of the outer rows, but if he does so, he'll have to separate Trumas Meiser from all 4 of them. The Mishnah offers a way for the owner to separate the Meiser and Trumas Meiser with the minimum of a loss. The same applies to the following cases of the Mishnah. So, you should take 2 corner barrels that are diagonally across from each other. Let's say, going down is, all the rows going down is numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and then the other ones are going to be letters. So he should take 2 corner barrels that are diagonally across each other. He'll take the top one of, he'll take J1, which would be the top one all the way on the right side, or he could take the bottom one all the way on the left side. For example, he takes barrels A and D. A would be, number A1, and D would be J10. The word kad and chavis are used interchangeably in this Mishnah. We have therefore translated both of them as barrel. So he pours the wine in them into 1 large barrel and designates it as Meiser Rishon. Since each corner barrel is part of 2 rows, two corner barrels that are diagonally across from each other represent all four outer rows. Thus, whichever row he originally designated is now represented by these two barrels. By taking two barrels from diagonally opposite corners, he's guaranteed of having taken a barrel from whichever outer row he has specified. He now has two barrels, one of which is Meiser Rishon and the other is Chulin. In order to separate Trumas Meiser from it, he pours both barrels into one large one. He then takes a tenth of the mixture as Trumas Meiser. Since the wine of each barrel spreads evenly through the mixture, he can be sure to have taken a tenth of the barrel that he had been designated as Meiser Rishon. The Mishnah speaks of a case where the other rows had all been gemeisered, and the only row in which he designated a barrel as Meiser, he had designated as Meiser, he wasn't mafresh anything yet. Thus, the mixture of the two corner barrels is a mixture of Meiser and Chulin. The second case would be if he said in half of an outer row of these 100 barrels are designated one barrel as Meiser Rishon for wine I have elsewhere, but he doesn't know which half it was. He forgot which of the 8 outer halves he specified. Since there are 4 outer rows, there are 8 half rows, each containing 5 barrels. So it could be anywhere from A meaning the top all the way on the left, B being the top all the way on the right, C being the bottom all the way on the left, and D being the bottom all the way on the right. So A would have 8 barrels going down as A1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and A 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going across. It's going down and across, 5 barrels in each direction. So Netel Arba Chavias Me Arba Zavias, you should take 4 barrels, one from each of the 4 corners, pour the wine into them, into the one larger barrel, and designate it as Meiser Rishon. Since each corner barrel is part of 2 half rows, these 4 barrels represent all 8 half rows. Thus, whichever half row he originally designated is now represented in these 4 barrels. He then pours all 4 barrels into one large barrel and separates 10% as Trumas Meiser. Shura Achas Meiser. If he said in one row of these 100 barrels that designated one barrel as Meiser Rishon for wine I have elsewhere, if any day Ezi Berena which row it was. In this case, he designated one of the rows, not necessarily an outer row. He therefore may have meant any one of the rows. It could be anywhere. So Neitel Shura Achas Loichson. He should take one diagonal row of barrels, either from A to D or from B to C, altogether 10 barrels of wine, and pour them into one large barrel and designate it as Meiser Rishon. Since the diagonal row of barrels contains one barrel from each row, whichever row he originally designated is now represented in these 10 barrels. So this is true whether the rows are counted from east to west or from north to south. After pouring these 10 barrels of wine into a larger container, he separates 10% of it, which is 1 barrel's worth, as Trumas Meiser, and gives it to a kohen. Chati Shura Achas Meiser. If he said a 1/2 row of these 100 barrels that designated 1 barrel as Meiser Rishon for wine I have elsewhere, Vein Yadua Ezehi, but I don't know which half row it was, Neitel Shtei Shuras Leifson should take 2 diagonal rows of barrels, which would be from A to D and B to C, 20 barrels in all. Meaning it would be going like an X down across the face of all these barrels. Pour them into one large container and designate it as Meiser Rishon. He then separates 10% of this larger container as Trumas Meiser, which would be 2 barrels worth, and give it to a kohen. Since 2 diagonal rows of barrels contain 1 barrel from each half row, whichever half row he originally designated is now represented in these 20 barrels. Chavis Achas Meiser. If instead of saying he designated one of the rows, he said one of these barrels that designated Meiser Rishon for wine I have elsewhere, that means he designated a part of 1 barrel as Meiser Rishon for tevel he had elsewhere. Vein Yidui Ezehi. It's not known which of the 100 barrels it was. Neitel Mikol Chavis Chavis. He has to take the amount needed from Trumas Meiser for each of the 10 barrels, for each of the 100 barrels. Pour all of them into one large container and designate them as Trumas Meiser. For example, if he designated 1/10 of one of the barrels as Meiser Rishon, he separates 1/10 of each barrel, combines them into one container, then designates 1/10 of this mixture, which is 1 barrel's worth, as Trumas Meiser. In this way, he's sure to have the Trumas Meiser for the 1 barrel that he had Meiser Rishon in it. Okay, we finished Perek Zayin, and with this we completed Masechta Dmai. Hadron Lach Masechta Dmai. The next Masechta will be Mitzvah Hashem Masechta Kalayim.